Oh yes, we are moving into our discussions now, but you just listened to the chairman, the national chairman of Accord Party, who is Barrister, okay, well, they no longer use that title, Maxwell Ngudem. That's the name. I didn't get the memo. We still got a barrister. Use those titles on their documents, or formal court documents, which automatically means that it's supposed to be your name. So, for instance, Kayla Megwa, barrister and solicitor, but not that you say barrister Kayla Megwa. So just for the public's education. Well, this morning we are talking security, and we do know that security was a big concern for the Osun elections. This morning we're joined by Mr. Kabir Adamu, who is a security expert, managing director of Beacon Security and Intelligence Limited. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Pleasure, Mope. Good morning.
I'm sure that you were monitoring, as we were, the security environment in the run-up to the elections in Osun State. 15,000 policemen deployed, about 10,000 security from the NSCDC, security personnel from the NSCDC. It's unclear how many soldiers were deployed, but I can tell you that with my own two eyes, I saw tanks and I saw soldiers on the ground in Osun State patrolling the place. So there are big questions as to hold on. Is this not over deployment? Will this amount to intimidation rather than big questions as to what exactly will be the fine lines in that regard? But thankfully, the people of Osun State were not intimidated, and thankfully, we haven't heard any real reports of injuries or violent deaths as a result of the elections in Osun State. So, as they say, the taste of the pudding is in the eating. But what really were your concerns, and how would you say that they were able to manage this ahead of the polls?
Excellent, thank you, Mope. We tabulated near about 40,000 security deployments during the elections from the different 40,000 from the different security organizations. The members of ICSES, which is the Interagency Consultative Committee on Election Security, there are about 21 members, different federal security ministries, departments, and so they contributed. Some of them, of course, uniformed, others in plain clothes. And just to give you a better sort of sense, EFCC will be part of that.
NDLEA.
Exactly.
We saw NDLEA.
Exactly. So they're about
immigration.
40,000 thereabout, and they probably would be more than that. So the perception from an academic point of view is that the the election environment was securitized. Now, this also goes to tell you the approach to managing security in Nigeria. That securitization theory is sort of our go-to. We deploy in an attempt to prevent. However, I think it's important to start the conversation with laying the foundation, what INEC has in terms of its risk management capabilities. And quickly, there are three sort of major components to that risk management capability. INEC has a tool that it got from International IDEA. It's one of the EU member states rolled out that tool. And I think it was in 2014, if I remember very well. It was under Mahmoud Jiga that tool was adopted, and the AU supported the adoption of that tool. So that's the principal sort of framework that INEC uses for managing election risk management. What happens is that it uses that tool to identify all the risks that are likely to affect the election. And for the first time in a very long while, INEC released the product of that tool ahead of the Osun elections. It identified hotspots that it felt that because of violence and several other factors, there could be disruption to the elections. Of course, each member of ICSES, and I said there are about 21 there of them, also conducted its own risk assessment. And I think the one that is of importance to us is the police, because they are the lead agency in internal security. They also sort of did their risk assessment and told us what they felt. And for the first time, I think in a very long while, I saw technology being used by the police. They did geomapping, they exhibited some element of an understanding of what a risk management framework could be like. The only challenge, which is part of what I'll discuss later, is I didn't see a sort of harmony between the tool that INEC used and then what the police also used. The military also conducted its own risk assessment and deployed accordingly. So in summary, we saw a variety of risk management capabilities, and then of course that led to deployment. Effectiveness was achieved. Efficiency, that's the conversation that we'll probably have as we continue in the conversation. Now the second tool that INEC uses from the Electoral Institute, which is an arm of INEC, it has what it calls FMAT. It's a survey tool that it puts out. It conducts that as an assessment, talks to experts, talks to media personalities, residents of Osun State, and then produces an assessment product which it also reels out. And then finally, there is a framework which is domiciled inside INEC, which receives some sort of reports from all of them, Yaga, Kuka Center, name them. And then together with the other two products that I mentioned, then you now have sort of a mitigation framework, and that is what you saw being deployed on the day of the election. Now we divide the election period into three: pre-election, during election, and then post-election. Clearly, from my database, the company that I had, we documented 36 deaths before the election. And I think in all ramifications, that's a clear failure. This sort of risk management framework will not prevent that level of fatality. So there is need for improvement in that area.
All of them election related?
All of them election related. There are 4 additional deaths that we could not verify. So we've not included them, but we're still sort of trying to verify. And if we do and they're election related, we would add them to that database. So the point I'm making is pre-election, I would say bad, because that level of death is not acceptable. And it has also left consequences that the victor, Governor Adeleke, that I would love to congratulate, and if he does invite me to his victory party, I would sort of dance with him on that day, but congratulations to him. Now, that level of violence has left sort of consequences, and I think we need to look back and see what went wrong. Why did that level of violence occur? What can we do better in upcoming elections, which is the general elections that will come up in January and February, so that we reduce or avoid those kind of violence. During elections, I will applaud the security agencies. So here we did document a couple of, I would say, low-level activities that can be categorized as election security related incidents, but none of them were acts of violence. They were more vote buying and things like that. So applause to the security agencies, and applause to INEC, and applause to the people of Osun State who showed resilience and who decided to tolerate each other and carry out the vote. Now post-election also I would assess it as near perfect, although there are residual risks that could trigger violence. As an example, the issue of the local governments and their access to the secretariat, access to their funding. These are issues that could trigger violence. Managing the consequences of some of the unfortunate statements that were made by certain politicians and some of their supporters. Managing the consequences of some stakeholders, including the NURTW, and of course we all know what the governor did before the elections. So those are some residual risks that we need to also monitor. So if we divide the period into two, I would say the pre-election, but during election, positive, applause to virtually everybody within that eco space, and then now post-election, also positive, but with residual risk that would need to be addressed.
At what point will we come out of this, the post-election phase? What point will we say, okay, whatever violence happens henceforth is no longer related to the elections, it's just violence? This, we experience crime and criminality in many parts of the country. Yeah. This we can categorize as not related to the election. At what point do you think we can come out of that?
So when I sat down and sort of did an analysis, I estimated 2 years. And I have
2 years?
Yes, 2 years. And I have my reasons. The level of negative mobilization that occurred before the election, the victor, I have just congratulated him. It would take him nothing less than a year plus to sort of address those circumstances that led to those, that the negative mobilization created. Now, of course, there will be the environment, as we already know, has elements of threats in them that are not related to the election. But then because the election itself sort of triggers or breeds those violence, the likelihood is that a lot of what we would see will be election related. And I've given you some of the examples, the local government issues, the NURTW issue, the unfortunate statement by some politicians. All of this would have left sort of residual risks. Good news, the police is sort of aware of that. I just read yesterday that they're going to deploy, I think about 15, no, I've forgotten the exact number, but there is a huge deployment that the police would leave behind in Osun State. And I guess it's because they also realize this residual risk that I'm talking about. I'm going to be optimistic that it will be less than those 2 years, but by my assessment, except if we take cognizance of some of the indicators and start addressing them one after the other, you could reach that.
So, Osun not out of the woods, yeah. How do we check the negative mobilization in the run-up to 2027?
A lot. I did mention the framework that INEC has. And one of the challenges is the absence of a convergence between what INEC does and what the other members of ICSES does. So I'm hoping, and this is a direct call to our development partners and CSOs like Yaga and the others. I think there is a need to sort of look into election security risk management and see how we can bring the various frameworks together so that we're speaking with one volume. Kela, there is no need for us to deploy 40,000 security personnel if we do the right thing.
Yeah.
In fact, it has become an avenue for generating.
I was just going to say, because the two economies, the negative mobilization economy and then the security economy.
Exactly. So that's number one. Converge those frameworks so that we have one output, and then that one output has to be overseen by an accountability framework, which is absent at the moment. What do I mean by an accountability framework? We need to be able to hold our security agencies to account for their conduct during the election. There are reports of certain policemen who fired tear gas to disperse crowd at the polling station. Now we've been told that our errant police officer has been arrested. What we would like to hear is what kind of measures in terms of penalization happen, and that has to be documented. It has to be made public. So we need to enhance accountability measures within this election security framework, and there are a lot of ways we can do that. We've discussed it in the 2023 elections. It never happened. We're discussing it now ahead of the 2027 election. So concrete effort has to be made in that regard. And then of course the last element is our security, our civil society organizations and the media. And I must commend these two components: the civil society, the media. We've done amazingly well in terms of your work, which is the fourth estate of the realm, to sort of put an eye, report what you're seeing. That has also helped. So we also need to do that without interfering with the operational procedures of the security agencies. Just sort of put an eye and put it out there. It's a check on misdemeanor and other conduct that they may do. But we also need to embrace technology. What do I mean by that? Those body cameras that we've discussed before. We need to find a way to ensure that our security agencies also deploy them.
You think our policemen, because this number for Osun was very large, it was very scary. We joked about it here on the program, and we tried to say if you need 15,000 policemen in Osun State, let's multiply 15 by 37. That's probably what you would need for the general elections. So. And that's just the police. We're not talking about the NSCDC or the army or the EFCC and the other elements that you mentioned there. Before the elections, we saw from civil society organizations complaints about how some cult groups even were what's the word? Activated. Yes, the activation of criminal networks, existing criminal networks within Osun State in the run-up to the elections. We are in August right now. The general elections are coming up in January and February next year, which means that for those who want to do nefarious things, the activation is starting now. That activation is starting now. Is there anything in our structure that checks this particular area so that we do not have an election where people feel that, I was looking at the Clean Foundation, a lot of people were saying they felt unsafe to come up for the elections. We were pleasantly surprised to see the whole of Osun out there like that.
I think about more than 50%.
Yes, which was beautiful, very impressive considering. So how do we ensure that these things are checked now before we start having this same conversation in February next year?
So my closing remarks to the earlier question is advocacy and sort of educating even the security personnel of their rules. The 2026 Electoral Act, of course, is new. Now, we knew, and what they knew, what was the content of the previous act. There is no evidence at the moment to show our security agencies are familiar with the content of the act as it affects their job. So we have a responsibility to ensure that they understand their mandate, where it starts and where it ends. That would help. And then, of course, lastly on that point, is advocacy for us too as Nigerians. And I would call on especially our schools, all places, the media as well, to please enhance on a campaign that would tell Nigerians sort of what their responsibility is as it regards voting. And I must commend organizations like Yaga and channels too. I think what you do, Election 101, I think it's called. A lot of people, my kids, I've got 2 teenagers, they love that component because they're able to relate with it. So we need to do a little bit more than that. Let us know what our rights are, what our responsibilities are, so that, of course, voting is a responsibility in some way. So we must also advocate that. Now, back to your question with regards to non-state actors that are easily mobilized. Now, the challenge is this, and I did a survey, my company, Beacon Security and Innovations Limited. We did a survey in northern state. I'm not going to mention the state. And believe me, I've been in the security for almost 30 years. The kind of crude weapons I saw in these non-state actors, I've never seen it in my life. And who are mobilizing them? Politicians. So the work has to start with politicians. No matter what we do, if we don't make our politicians realize that engaging these non-state actors is counterproductive to them, it will be an act in futility. So that's our beginning point. Let the politicians be accountable. Let them understand that the only choice is to engage the formal security sort of organizations. Right now, they do engage these non-state actors as a link within their security protection. On the one hand, to protect themselves. On the other hand, to intimidate the opposition. So we need to put a stop to that, starting with them. And that means some form of advocacy with the political parties. IPAC, for instance, can play a role. Advocacy with the politicians themselves. And then more importantly, with the youth groups. Because a significant portion of these persons are within that demography, youth. If we do that, Ministry of Youth, I think a Ministry of Communication, these are ministries that can play a huge role in this regard. But the beginning point are our politicians. If they don't embrace this, if they don't agree to it, it will be an act in futility, whatever we do.
You know, it's interesting that just yesterday the Nigerian Customs seized some weapons at Tinkan Island Port, and I think it handed over to the Committee for Non-Proliferation. For I think small and light weapons. So it is interesting. I think the comments of the Controller General of Customs were quite instructive in that direction. But let me bring you back to the conversation in Osun State. Some people say there's a fine line between mobilization to protect the people and mobilization where the people are now frightened about the amount of security agents on the ground and do not come out to vote. At what point would you say that, we manage this line or we cross it?
So the work of security MDAs in an election is to provide the right environment for a free, fair and credible elections to occur. That means voters have to feel safe. They have to feel not intimidated. They have to feel the desire to come out and vote in that environment. And INEC too, that of course has a responsibility to sort of conduct the elections, has to be protected, has to feel safe. Anytime any of this is interfered with by security agencies, then they would have failed in their responsibility. They would have influenced the outcome of the elections and not facilitated the election. And of course, there are so many things that have happened in the past. I gave the example of a police officer who allegedly threw tear gas, and since he's been arrested, I think I can remove that word, allegedly. There are instances in previous elections where 2 different security organizations would fight at a polling collation center because they want to take control of that collation center. There are the infamous videos in the past where some of our uniformed personnel were seen discussing collection of money in order to influence the outcome of an election. So there are instances where the conduct and act of our security personnel has influenced the outcome of elections. That's a no. And I'm very happy that the 2026 Electoral Act has been very clear. It has provided in very clear terms what the mandate, what the work of our security agencies should be. The challenge is this: that responsibility lies with INEC. Unfortunately, INEC does not have the capacity to sort of give or provide operational guidance to our security agencies. Even if INEC has that capacity, you and I know that they would not listen to INEC. The Act says INEC can call upon them as it wishes for them to provide security during the elections. But the challenge is INEC cannot sort of direct them on what to do. So
they won't even take directives from
but there are ways. Earlier on I spoke about accountability measures. INEC needs to do a couple of things. Number one, enhance the capacity of his security department. If you have, let's say, the person heading that department, if he knows his onions, he would be able to introduce some accountability measures. He's not directing them, but at least he's able to hold them accountable. If the police comes to me and tells me they are deploying 15,000 personnel, I should be able to ask in very clear terms, who are these 15,000 personnel?
Where are you deploying
them? What is the rationale for that deployment? If I don't know my onions, I won't be able to do that. So that's, I think, number one. Increase the capacity of that department. Number two is to increase the capacity of the risk departments. And there are two. The Electoral Institute, and then of course the department within INEC that has that responsibility, so that the officers in that department know what risk management is, and they are able to sort of hold these other security agencies to account. So that would, I think, go a long way towards reducing the potential and the sort of what we've seen in the past, where some exuberant and overzealous security personnel would interfere with the electoral process.
Well, we're in the run-up to the 2027 elections now. I imagine that we've already started keeping tabs on the security environment and also monitoring what it is going to be like ahead of the elections, and if any violence would be security related. Today, as we're highlighting with my colleague, we are going to be witnessing the signing of a peace accord amongst the political actors, the presidential political actors, ahead of the start of campaigns. What do you think we need to watch out for as we head, especially within the security environment, as we head to 2027?
So the threat factors are visible to us. We know them. I look at the 6 geopolitical zones, and for each of the zones I can reel out a couple of threat factors. I mean, the most sort of worrisome one on the mind of Nigerians at the moment are the ideological sort of non-state armed groups, the Jamaat al-Ahlissun al-Dawat wal-Jihad. There are about 6 or 7 of them, the terrorist groups that are within our Terrorism Prevention and Prohibition Act. The Lakurawas, the Islamic State in West Africa province, about 6 of them, and spread across northeast, northwest, and north central Nigeria. Then the bandit groups that the president has said, ordered that they should be categorized as terrorist groups as well. They are spread, of course, across most parts of northern Nigeria. The infamous sort of inter-community violence, the Farmer-Hada violence, secessionist agitation, still in the southeast, and unfortunately parts of the southwest as well. Gangs that are active in different parts of the country. Cult groups that are also active. Of course, we've spoken about political talks that are also active. So all of this sort of is the environment within which the elections are going to hold. In the Niger Delta, you have militant groups that are active and all of that. So we must contend with that. We should appreciate the environment and the threat factors within them. We've not spoken about the cyber threat. That's also another area. INEC has increasingly embraced technology, and that has widened the scope for the cyber vulnerability scope, and it means cyber security could be a threat factor ahead of the 2027 elections. Foreign influence operations is something that we should also take note of and address. There are countries that pay huge sums of money to influence the outcome of elections, and this has happened in the past. It's going to happen in 2027. There are companies, private companies, security, that are also offering their services to certain elements, internal and external, to also conduct this type of foreign influence of operations on our elections. So we also need to take up that. Then there are Nigerians too who, for one reason or the other, maybe they are grieved or whatever their objectives are, that could also support this foreign influence operations through disinformation, through misinformation, through propaganda. And unfortunately, in this era of AI and machine learning, it makes that capability more obvious than it is.
Are we ready? Can we handle all of these things?
So the good thing is this: I did tell you that INEC has a tool. It's one of the best in the world. International Ideas Election Risk Management tool. It would take note of all of this. What worried me in the past is that the product of that tool was never made obvious. But the good news is in the Osun elections, we saw the product of that tool, at least in the area of physical security. But just like I've reeled out now, it's more than physical security. There are so many other components. And I think we've got a bit of time. So I'm hoping, and I've sent a few messages to the INEC chairman. I'm hoping that he needs to sit with his risk management tool. He needs to appreciate that in this era, you can't have anyone closer to you than your risk management component. His own personality too. Of course, we know what he inherited, the glitch that he inherited, then some of the unfortunate things that have emerged after he was appointed. That's also another risk that would need to be addressed. Then political interference, funding of INEC activities. INEC is supposed to be independent, but technically there are some aspects of INEC activities that are not necessarily independent. That is a risk that he needs to admit and mitigate. So that's sort of the risk paradigm ahead of the 2027 elections, with a few others that I don't want to say here because it's a public platform that INEC would need to contend with. And if all of us, and I'm sure we want a free, fair and credible elections in 2027, we need to pool resources, come together like we did in the Osun election and try to address those risks ahead of the elections.
Well, we certainly all have our work cut out for us ahead of the 2027 elections. We have to thank you very much for providing some insight into the security performance and lessons for 2027. Thank you so much for coming on the program.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, Mr. Kabiru Adamu is a security expert and also the managing director of Beacon Security and Intelligence Limited. Thank you once more.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Security is still very much on the front burner, but this time around we're going to be discussing how it affects schools, as the federal government is now going to be deploying 3,000 volunteers through the Man O' War program to protect vulnerable institutions. In just a moment, please stay with us.